just 3 questions. Each panelist will have 3 minutes, no more. I'll be watching the time, and then we'll do the Q&A, and then we'll give the panelists a chance to just give one quick what they would love the audience to lead with, okay? All right, the first question, and I'm just going to pass the mic. First question is, from your perspective, what do people need to know that's not well known?
Thanks, I'm happy to go first. So many of you know what CDOT does. CDOT is your transportation department for the state of Colorado, and we have lots of roads. We have about a $2 billion budget. What you may not know, that's exciting to this panel probably, is that we spend about $12 to $17 million a year investing in something called Road X. And Road X is the road of the future. Some of the things we do with Road X are immediate, and some of them are in the near future, so I'll tell you about the immediate ones right away. We do smart highways. So for example, we have a program called Smart 25. It's from Ridgegate to University. Data-driven ramp meters, so you see those ramp meters, they're not scheduled to change their data changes them as the traffic comes through those ramp meters. And we use software and sensors to make that traffic flow a little bit better. Once we get that project done, you'll be seeing those data-driven ramp meters at all the ramp meters that we have. We have Smart 70, which is Golden to Vail, real-time data for hazards. You might have seen these if you're driving on 70. You can see these hazard signs that say low visibility, multi-car, pile up ahead, sun glare, those kinds of things. We have something called an attenuator. An attenuator is a large autonomous construction vehicle. We used to put these construction vehicles that were man-driven into construction areas to divert traffic, and very often they were hit. And so we take people out of there and use an autonomous vehicle. That's the attenuator, and it's to block the construction so that anybody coming along, if they're veering into that traffic, they hit the attenuator, and we can move those kind of like a remote control car. We have something called Smart Pavement, and that is roadside sensors that are going into the pavement. We have about a $20 million build grant that we just got, and we're putting a lot of that real-time information and smart sensors. We have 537 miles of that already in place, and we keep going as we have the budget to do that. We have real-time work zone notification. You know, if there's a work zone you want to know ahead. You saw those orange barrels. They have a sensor inside them, and they've got a GPS locator. Waze will tell you that there's a work zone there. When that work zone's finished, we take that sensor out of there and put it in another barrel at another location. And you can also look on Google for that. They have a beacon. We have Wheelwright, which is a panel that trucks can drive onto that will take their tread measure and their pressure measure as a safety issue for those trucks. And then we have smart parking for trucks, and that means that they can be notified where there's a parking area at rest stops and along those kinds of stops that they have to make, so they don't have to keep going and come back around. We have a great partnership with Panasonic. We have something called V2V, V2X, vehicle-to-vehicle communication and vehicle-to-everything else communication. That's something we're working on now, and we'll have a lot more about that in the future. That's so that if your vehicle's on the road, it can tell that vehicle next to it what it's doing, if it sees a hazard up ahead, those kinds of things. It's the kind of thing that people are building now into their new vehicles, and you'll see more and more of this. And then we have smart lampposts that ask every vehicle, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And we'll see that going forward.
Thanks. Vince Busick, RTD. I'm a director for District J. We're sitting in District J. Westminster, Northglenn, Federal Heights, some Western Thornton, so forth. It's probably in my bio there. RTD, some of the things you should know about RTD, and I'll take questions after this about why things aren't happening and all that. But some of the things you should know, though, RTD is a big organization. It covers 8 counties. There are 15 board members that are elected within their districts. We cover approximately 2,400 square miles. We serve a population of in excess of 3 million people, and we have 101 million boardings per year. So it's a big organization. It does a lot of stuff. It doesn't do enough as far as I'm concerned, especially up north, but it does a lot of stuff. And to that end, one of the things that RTD is embracing recently is something they call the transportation transformation. And it's a way to integrate mobility options with public transit. Everybody knows about the electric bikes and the electric scooters that are popping up downtown. We refer to those things as TNCs, Transportation Network Companies. There are these other pieces that help you get from place to place. So transportation transformation with RTD is a mechanism and a method and a concept to integrate all of these things. So recently RTD announced a partnership with Uber, first of its kind in the nation, where you can get on an Uber app and you can book your Uber and your transit piece all at once. It's a start, and it's an important start, because from there you can add on more and more and more transit options, bring in more of these transportation network companies, TNCs, and book them all from one platform and get to where you want to be as quickly as you can. So the Uber partnership is a big deal. Transportation transformation, integrating all these mobility options, that's kind of what we see in the pretty near future for RTD. Thanks.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Whoa! I'll sit over here. Good evening, everyone. It's nice to be here. I'm Karen Gervis with World Trade Center. How many of you actually knew there was a World Trade Center outside of New York? Fantastic. We've been around 31 years here in Denver, and we are, the World Trade Center is the largest private trade association in the world. We've got 330 offices in 100 countries. So, and there are over a million companies that are part of us as members or tenants. Or the one unique thing about World Trade Center, though, is that we're not a franchise, so we're all a little bit different. But we're based on a real estate model with a global business services component, trade services component inside. So most of us have both of those. And we're building a brand new World Trade Center here in Denver. We were located at 16th and Broadway for 27 years. In those two towers, we moved out a couple of years ago, so it's no longer called the World Trade Center. We're building a new one in Rhino, on 38th and Blake, right on the TOD, right on the train stop. Really excited about that. It should be opening at the end of 2020. So it'll be a nice new global ecosystem for Denver and Colorado to welcome international visitors, as well as support companies growing through trade. And supporting companies growing through trade is really needed, because here's something you might not know. 95% of the population lives outside the United States, and 70% of the purchasing power is outside the United States. Yet less than 5% of companies in the US export. So, what does that say? We're not taking advantage of the most incredible market, which is outside of the US. We rely on our domestic market. Why? Because it's easier, it's safe, it's predictable, it's strong. But there's a huge market potential out there. And so we're trying to help companies inspire them, educate them, and coach them through this process. There's lots of resources for companies to go global. It's just we need to create more of a global mindset in Colorado to explore those options. So you might have heard our president talk about a deficit, trade deficit, that we import more than we export. That is true. We will always do that. As the one of the highest economies in the world, we will always import more than we export. But here's the thing: our trade deficit wouldn't be so bad if we had more than 5% of companies exporting. So I'm trying to change that. I'm trying to make Denver a more global city, trying to make Colorado globally connected. We've been doing that for 31 years as an organization, and we offer about 100 events a year as an organization. We're a nonprofit trade association in town, helping companies get plugged in, connected, educated, counseled, coached, and we have a great network of companies that are globally minded, future thinking, and there's no more innovative company than the one that can compete on the global stage. So, thanks.
All right, my name is Steve Odoricio. I am one of the county commissioners in Adams County. Some of the stuff that you don't know or may not know is that the whole transportation, I think, begins and ends in Adams County. How's that? If you look at it, we have both rails that go through Adams County, BN and UP, with some short line railroads, and I'll let Bob go into all that, but we also have some of the greatest the highway systems come and go. Obviously, I-25, I-76, 270, all the way, you got 36, Highway 7. What I'm getting at is everything kind of comes together in Adams County, and so that also includes our rivers and trails, the biggest river systems in the metro area, Platte River, Clear Creek, and Sand Creek. So what does that all mean? When we're looking at a multimodal approach to transportation, Adams County is going to be key in that. But the most important things that we didn't talk about yet is that we also are the home to Denver International Airport. If you guys know, that's the land that Denver annexed from Adams County back in the 80s. 1988, they annexed the land. That's why Denver is the shape of Yoshi, or that, it's like a big head and a body and a neck that goes down. And so that's why we have that, but also catty corner to Denver International Airport, we have the new Colorado Air and Spaceport. Colorado Air and Spaceport, what that is that we were able to, over the course of 6-7 years, and this is through many county commissioners, all continuing to share a vision of turning what was once Front Range Airport into a Colorado Air and Spaceport. And what that means is that we obtained the license to have a site for our spaceport. And so what that means is eventually it gives us the chance to go get businesses that want to eventually launch certain types of vehicles from that location into space. We're talking that may start out as space tourism and eventually end up with space travel. And that means Tokyo in 2 hours. So those are some of the things, but remember, it all begins and ends in Adams.
Wow, I didn't know that. What county are we in now?
Jefferson.
We're in Jefferson. Well,
Where were you in? Were you an Adams County Commissioner?
Well, yeah.
There you go.
And was I District 29 representative on RTD board? Yeah. Been there, done that. I'm Bob Briggs, and I want to ask you a question. In May of 1869, where were all of you at? What took place on that day? 1869. That day in Utah, they connected the Trans-America Railroad, right? That'll be 150 years old this year. Railroads are being built the same today as they were 150 years ago, with a couple minor exceptions. One is they're welding the track instead of bolting it together, and the other is they, in some cases, use concrete ties rather than the wood ties. But it's being built the same way today as it was then. And so, but the impact of rail, just think of what it was 150 years ago. And if we talk about the future and we talk about 150 years from now, if we're doing the same things today as we did 150 years ago, you're not going to see any impact. What's got to happen for the future is that rail system has to be modified into what we call modern rail. And that means it's got to be built different. It's got to be orchestrated so you can get both passenger service and local freight. My friends in Adams County tell me that the #1 demand that they have for economic development is local freight service. Who hasn't provided the local freight service in the state of Colorado since 1965? Burlington Northern and Union Pacific. They'll take your application and 3 years come back and tell you no. Because they don't do that. And that's part of modern rail. We have to provide that opportunity for our businesses to be able to ship their products. And that means that that rail has to be reinvented. And so that's what we're looking at and thinking about. And hopefully, as we go through this evening, you'll have an opportunity to hear about some of the other things that we are going to be doing in the future to make that all possible.
You can hold on.
I didn't want to go first.
No. All right, you can go second if you choose. The next question. So what unfolding technologies or initiatives or policies excite you and why?
Great question. We're looking at doing electric vehicles. And you all say, well, the only example you have is what RTD is doing, and that's when they run that overhead extension cord to run that overhead extension cord cost 3 times what the track cost. What we're looking at is a new battery technology. If you go online and look at Proterra Bus Company, and they're using rechargeable batteries to power their buses, and their buses will go 300 plus miles between charges. And if you put that same vehicle on a steel tire rail and run it, it'll go over 1,000 miles. And 60% of your cost, if you're running diesel, is the diesel. And when you're running electric that can be applied at each station and therefore generated at each station, you can reduce your cost from that 60% of your overhead cost to something less than 10%. And people say, well, passenger rail doesn't pay for itself. Well, it doesn't if you do it the old way. But if you do it the new way, it does. And that's what we're planning on doing, is using that technology installed in rail cars. There'll be double-deck rail cars. The top deck will have windows from one side to the other. So if you're sitting there and you're going through the Royal Gorge, you can see both sides of the canyon sitting in one seat. You can't do that with the current Vistadomes, but our cars, you'll be able to do that. And so we're going to have a business class on the upper story of that thing, and then a first class or a commuter class on the bottom rail, and that will make all the difference in how we're going to pay for what we got going on.
Sure, with the question.
Sure.
It's the policies, initiatives?
Yeah,
Okay.
technologies, initiatives, policies.
That excite me. I have to admit, a lot of the stuff that I'm hearing on this panel is pretty exciting to me. And I will have to say though, that the stuff that's going on with the rail is fascinating. I think the things that RTD is doing, I'm gonna just go down the line, is absolutely fascinating. But also, if you heard all that stuff that Karen's talking about, and then when you're gonna listen, I mean, I'd love for you to talk about inland port stuff. But I mean, so all of this stuff is happening. Now, why do I kind of look like I'm passing the buck to give credit to everyone here? Is because as a local government, I have to pay attention to all of these. And they're all gonna come together in how we are able to work with these different agencies and partners to bring about implementation at the local level. So to me, listening to what's happening with potential partners is very exciting to me. Locally, I'd like to see us continue to work on these innovations so we can get to that last mile, so we can make our cars and all our other transportation more energy efficient. So at the state level, I'm really excited to hear that the new governor, Polis, decided to set the bar high and say that we will meet efficiency standards for our cars. That our energy efficiency push at the state and the local levels are starting to pick up. We're not seeing a lot of that vision setting right now at the federal level, unfortunately. We're seeing a lot of fighting. So that what I'm most excited about is that we've kind of forced a lot more innovation and a lot more action into the local levels. And so what that means is we're going to be working with these partners that you see on this panel up here, but also I want to see things like us talk about how can we turn these trail systems that I was talking about into a bike highway? How can we utilize some of those devices that Vince was referring to, whether it's a scooter or it's a Segway or it's a bicycle or something else, to really integrate transportation with heavy rail and passenger rail or buses. And so I have to just say that I'm most excited to hear how we can try to take all these different ideas that you hear about that sound like they're kind of separate and bring them all together at the local level.
So I am really excited about, I learn a lot from my colleagues at other World Trade Centers, and that's, we come together a couple times a year to share best practices. And I was once asked, several years ago now, 4 or 5 years ago, I was invited to go up to Winnipeg, Canada, in Manitoba. It's inland province, if you don't know. And I was giving a presentation to them. And I got a tour of their trimodal inland port. They were claiming and marketing it, positioning it as the largest trimodal inland port in North America. I'm like, oh, I'm intrigued. I'd like to see what that is. And it's true, it was quite connected. They had rail going out close to the airport, and there were trucks and distribution centers, and it felt all very concentrated and connected. But when I asked how large it was, it's smaller than our airport land. So I said, how can you claim that you have the largest trimodal inland port? And he said, because we just do. And what's interesting about that is that, you know, Utah is now positioning themselves as an inland port. Buffalo Niagara is positioning themselves as the Canada-US port. These are economic development tactics to try to attract foreign direct investment into your state and to create a movement, if you will, for highlighting how commerce moves through your state. And we all know that Colorado's at the crossroads, right? We have rail going east and west, north and south. We're right in the middle of North America. If you look at east-west, Canada, Mexico, we're right in the middle. A lot of cargo goes through Colorado, but we don't pay attention to it. We only talk about passengers coming into the airport. We talk about how many people move to Denver every week. We talk about talent, quality of life, 300 days of sunshine. I mean, I've been in economic development my whole career. And I never have heard anybody talk about cargo. And I think that's a shame. I think we should highlight how important Colorado is for the movement of cargo and actually shine a light on what could be Colorado's inland, could be quad-modal port, the spaceport there too. If we drew a circumference around our activity of rail, trucking, distribution centers, and spaceport, we've got a pretty great story to tell. And it's all about positioning. I know that to be true. Of course, there's some infrastructure that will need to take place, but think about if you started to shine a light on how much commerce comes through Colorado and how much more will come through Colorado in 2030 because of all the population that's moving here. It becomes a significant story to tell for Colorado's economic development attraction point for international visitors that are moving here, or international companies that we're trying to attract here, or even companies from California that we're trying to attract here. So all that sort of outside investment helps our economy. They hire our people, create more jobs. It's fantastic for us. So what I'm starting to do is just look into it a little bit more because obviously I care about cargo. I run a trade center. I care about transportation and making sure that logistics move freely, supply chains are optimized. We care about all that as an organization. But ever since I've been talking about this just for the last few years, I've started to meet people like Andoni and Bob and and now on the CDOT's Freight Advisory Council. And I'm starting to learn kind of where our strengths and weaknesses are in this field. And I have a long way to go in terms of finding out who all the players are and what the challenges are. But to be honest, I feel like it's something with the right coalition around the table, the right minds around the table, we can take this opportunity and run with it and create North America's central port that people start focusing on and we no longer need to be that flyover state. And so that's something I'm excited about.
Thank you. The question was about policy and technology. And something that really makes me excited about the policy and technology initiative that CDOT is doing is looking at transportation in a different way. We're not just looking at highways, we're looking at mobility, and we're looking at multimodal approach for that mobility in our transportation planning. And one of the things we plan for are new interchanges that can become mobility hubs. And at this point, Andoni, I'm going to ask you to show my video. I have 3 short YouTube videos, and I'll speak while we're showing those videos. You might know I-25 is a designated freight corridor. And so this first video is a flyover. You're seeing that you're coming up from the south, you're going past E470, and now you're coming up to State Highway 7 and I-25. This idea for a mobility hub at I-25 and Highway 7 is one of several we're looking at. This mobility hub will allow trucks to stay in the middle and go through so it doesn't impede the truck traffic that goes through there. And then it's a piece on the top between the east and west side that becomes a mobility hub. What is a mobility hub? It allows for multimodal options to converge and connect at that location. So that's the first overview coming up from the south to this mobility hub. Now we'll do the next one. The next one shows how the levels of mobility will work. So here we go onto the mobility hub again. We're coming up close to it. This is an overview of the mobility hub, and you're looking at the bottom layer, which is the pedestrian connection. The pedestrian connection is one that can be a connection for people who walk, people who bike, people who are getting off of a bus and getting onto another bus, and people who could use an autonomous people mover like Easy Mile. That's a good people mover for 1 mile. It could connect from that hub to the west side to the McQuinney property, to the east side to Larkridge property, to any other of those commercial pieces that are there. So that shows how on the bottom level, or really the first level, pedestrians can get through. And now we'll go to the last one. And that will show the transit hub and how the transit hub works. If you know anything about I-25 and Highway 7, you know that there's no transit up there. It's not because we don't need it, it's because no one will pay for it. CDOT has a program called the Bustang. The Bustang has been very successful. It brings transit down from Fort Collins and Loveland all the way down to Denver. It doesn't stop anywhere in between, just travels our corridor. When this mobility hub is built, the Bustang can stop at this mobility hub, and you can transfer to a local bus, a bus rapid transit on Highway 7 that connects Boulder to Brighton, or you can take the I-25 express bus that's going to run down I-25. In this mobility hub, there's a number of options that can happen. We can have electric charging stations for both e-bikes and for electric vehicles. We've talked about drone delivery pedestals as well. This is something that CDOT is involved with, probably unbelievable that we're also involved in drone delivery, but we're talking about it. We're at the table and we're part of this conversation. And this kind of a model that's a multimodal hub really keeps the roadway footprint from having to expand. It keeps everything within it. It's a diverging diamond, and that takes less room than a traditional interchange. So it's in the future. It's not funded completely, But we continue to look at options for multi-funders, both communities, grant participation, and RTD, don't forget RTD. And so we're looking at that, and that won't be the only multimodal hub, but I think we're really reinventing how transportation works in the state of Colorado. Pretty excited about that. Oops, sorry.
Thanks, and RTD is excited about that mobility hub as well. As Karen indicated, when we eventually get BRT on Highway 7 connecting Boulder to Brighton, that'll be a critical stop at I-25 to get people going down to Union Station downtown. And also when we get the BRT running north of 120th on I-25, another critical stop for the BRT. Other technologies that excite me on RTD are twofold. There's electrification and there's autonomous vehicles, okay? So RTD has 1,035 buses in its fleet. And we also have the largest electric bus fleet in the country at 36. 36 buses. That's the mall ride on the 16th Street Mall. So it's something, but not enough. But RTD is looking at electrification of its base system of local and regional buses. Some of the challenges are, as Bob Briggs indicated, battery technology. Although it's advancing in an exponential rate, it's still pretty far behind. And currently, the market-ready battery systems for buses that are out there will get you about 200 miles on a charge. Like I said in my introduction, we cover 2,400 square miles, so some of the routes are pretty long, and they go back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. So you're going more than $200 in a day. So the infrastructure to create charging stations and all that along the way is going to be important. But RTD is looking at that and looking at how to improve and increase its electrified fleet. And as you know, our governor said recently that he's a big proponent of electric vehicle operations. So RTD heard that, and I think we're going to keep moving ahead on that as well. The other thing is autonomous vehicle technology, and as you know, RTD opened the first autonomous vehicle bus service in the country about 2 weeks ago. It's the Route 61 AV. It is at the 61st and Pena rail station on the A line, the train, the bus to the plane, or whatever they call it. So it's one vehicle. It holds 12 people. It goes about 12 miles an hour. It follows a 1.2 mile fixed route. It's got embedded sensors, and it's got its own little sensors, but it's what we now call a demonstration project, right? It's a start. So it's free for this coming year, and the pilot program is going to be a year. RTD is taking all this data with its partners, and Panasonic, EasyMile, TransDev. There are a number of partners in this thing because they all are interested in developing and advancing and creating autonomous transit, because that would be such a great deal, especially since RTD constantly struggles in getting operators to operate their trains and buses. So it's an exciting project. It seems small scale, and it is small scale, but you got to start somewhere, right? I mean, some of the greatest advances in technology started with something very, very small. So excited to see how this works out and what kind of lessons we can learn from the 61 AV routes. Thanks.
All right, third question. Share your wishes for what transportation looks like in 10 to 20 years from now.
Well, I think we need high-speed rail for passengers and cargo. And I think we have a lot of people to learn from to implement that. I don't know if you've been to China, but there's lots of high-speed rail, and they do it very efficiently. Japan never misses a minute on their transportation schedule. I think if we learn from our strongest trading partners how to not only move goods, but to engineer projects like that, and that we share our engineering with them, we both become better. So trading of engineering services is something I'm advocating for. I also am very excited that the French and Germans have collaborated to create a hydrogen-powered train that emits water. And I think that's something we ought to look into and pay attention to. I love CDOT's Hyperloop that they're considering, and we've had a presentation to our members on that project. I hope it comes to fruition. I think we need to think about moving people along the Front Range more effectively, more efficiently, maybe up to the mountains, more effectively, more efficiently, but cargo needs to be part of the conversation. Today it's not. It's totally separate. It's on archaic systems, as we heard. There's lots of choke points in Colorado. We'd like to try to change that. And I think with some of this shared engineering, shared technology, shared innovation from our global trading partners, we can get there. So let's see. I also think TOD sites are going to become incredibly important for our city and our state. So when you are on a transit stop, we should see high density projects there to create a sense of place, and this placemaking is important. It can't just be high rise, high rise, high rise, but it has to be a place with purpose, and which is why we've selected a TOD site, transit-oriented development site. 38th and Blake is where the New World Trade Center will be, and it's going to be a full global ecosystem with conference facilities, hotel, and a corporate office tower as phase 1, and then additional towers for phase 2. So it's all about creating a sense of place, and I think some areas in Denver and throughout Colorado have done that very well. And I love the mobility center that you presented, because we can use those at those senses of place. That placemaking is so critical for our city's growth, and we can't only focus on the sprawl of our surrounding communities. So I think we have to be really smart in how we develop around transit sites. So I'd like to see us focus a lot more on that in the coming decade. More and more people coming to our city and our state. I think I have a figure here. In Colorado, we're supposed to get, let's see, we have about 5.5 million now, and I think we're moving to like 8 or 6.5. I have the number here somewhere, I forget where it is. But it's, obviously we're getting like 1,000 people a week here. You're seeing these stats throughout the newspapers. But we have to figure out how we're going to create mobility for that type of growth, as well as housing infrastructure and other infrastructure for them. So I think creating more density in our city with a purpose is critical.
I'd love to see transportation be clean, convenient, and of course we're going to say, most of all, accessible. It needs to be accessible to everybody, and I think that what you're hearing is that part of the places that we just heard about, that goes with long-term land use planning, working with partners like RTD and CDOT, and so I look forward to us working toward taking advantage of those TOD locations, but most of all, mobility right now is such an impediment for so many families, for so many people, whether it's something simple to get your kids to and from school, getting you or your parents to and from the doctor, or getting the products to and from. I think we're going to continue to see that transportation needs to be clean, it needs to be convenient, but most of all, it needs to be accessible to all. So that's something that I'm looking forward to seeing.
2050. What's the population of our great state going to be in 2050?
It's 7 million in 2030.
That's going to be 9 million. By 2100, it will be 18 million. And we have to have a reinvented transportation system to move and to allow to move all of those people. And it has to include freight, it has to include passenger service, and it needs to be thought about in a different way than we have thought about it up till now. RTD represents half of the state's population. The other half does not have a transit or a freight service component.
How much of the state area?
Well, RTD, you mean what RTD is? It's probably somewhere around 10 to 15%. The rest of the state is a lot less density, and so that's where we have to be, and we have to start thinking about that. As I think about what is going to happen in 20 short years, one of the first projects we're looking at doing is building a bypass set of tracks for Union Pacific and Burlington Northern that will go between Rocky Ford and Brush to allow their current use of their right-of-way to be moved out there. All right? When that happens, that creates the opportunity to purchase from both of those railroads their right-of-way. And you can't do anything on these right-of-ways unless you own them. And so you got to buy it from those private companies. And so that's the process that we're going through. And I expect that by 2020, we'll have the first 3 projects done. One is the bypass tracks, one is a train to Fort Collins, a third is the remodel of Moffett Tunnel to allow more tourists and more visitors going through that tunnel, because that's our only east-west connection. So those are the types of envisionments that I have, and we can do all this with the ability to issue revenue bonds. And so we're in the process of creating a local government that can issue revenue bonds to help finance those projects. Other than that, we haven't got anything to do.
Thanks. So this is my chance to get a little soapboxy, because I've been on the RTD board now for, oh my gosh, 6 weeks. So I was elected in November of 2018, took office January 8th of 2019. One of the big reasons I ran is to ensure equity for the population north of I-70, us. We have a lot of rail lines going through my district. For fast tracks, I've got the N line, the G line, which touches my district, the B line, and the Flatiron Flyer. So the Flatiron Flyer is the bus on US 36. It's part of fast tracks. It's working. The B line, it has one stop. The G line not open, N line not open. So in order for me to get real excited about first mile, last mile, all that stuff, you have to have that backbone of transit in place. Otherwise, we're talking first 10 miles, first 20 miles, last 20 miles, because there's nothing to connect you to. So for me, the next 10 to 20 years, we need to see this fast tracks done much quicker than that. More BRT in the interim to be a gap filler. And then we can start up here on the north end talking more and more about the first last mile and exciting options for that. But so that's my soapbox. I won't say too much more about that, but there are a lot of things in public transit that can be improved upon, and a lot of technologies that we can embrace to make people's daily lives better. Thanks.
You're here. Get it done. I'll talk about I-25 again because it's a good model to talk about. I-25. If you are driving from I-25 from about Highway 7 and you're headed down south in the morning, and you have some trucks in front of you, you'll watch the trucks move from the right-hand lane to the middle-hand lane to the left-hand lane at about 136, because they need to get into that left-hand lane to get to 270 to take their cargo, and they get cut off. So what they do is they move into traffic. I suspect 10 to 20 years from now that truck traffic will not be the problem it is today, because what I envision really is platooning of those autonomous trucks that will be able to run 24/7 along a repurposed HOV lane. We won't need those HOV lanes because we'll have vehicles that can talk to each other a little bit better, but if we get those trucks out of the way, I think that will help with the congestion. When you talk about transportation, and from our CDOT viewpoint, we talk about transportation really as mobility options. We're not just about highways anymore. And what we're looking for are seamless connections that allow all those mobility options to come together in the best way they can for whatever location they're at. So 10 to 20 years, I'd love to see those trucks be taken out of mainstream travel and into a repurposed HOV, so you don't have to pay tolls anymore, and those trucks can go 24/7, and they don't have to have a driver in the truck that has to have a nap.
Great. I'm going to take some questions from the audience, but the way I'm going to do it, hold on, is I'm going to walk down there with this microphone. I'm going to pass around this other wireless one here for this. We have a short one mic tonight, and please don't ask your question until you have the mic. All right. So I'm going to get up and go, and try not to cause feedback in this right now. Okay. Now you can reach it. And this gentleman in the back this gentleman was first.
Does anyone know of anyone anywhere that's working on 200-mile-per-hour highways and automobiles and individual personal transportation systems to offload some of the capacity of airplanes and even high-speed trains, which we don't have? And I wonder if it would be cheaper to develop the highways than the trains.
Whoever wants to answer, you just have to pass that around. Hold the mic.
Whatever, is that, oh, there it is. Whatever rail system we put together for passenger service has to include a 200+ mile per hour service, whether it be Hyperloop or a personal connection or whatever it is. It has to include that. So yes, we're talking about it. No, we haven't fully identified as to what it will be, but it is being talked about because it's a necessity. Our train system has to reach out 500, 600, 700 miles. And if you can make that trip at 200 miles an hour in 2 to 3 hours, that allows you to connect to all of the 7 states and the state of Colorado, the 8-state region, in a couple hours. And that makes all the difference in the ability to move between Colorado and the rest of those states. And that will include freight service going along those lines. So yes, we are talking about it. What we know is it is a lot more expensive, and we're trying to figure those minor costs out. You know, something like 5 times more expensive than what we're talking about for other rail.
Anyone talking about cars, though?
We aren't.
Is CDOT talking about cars?
What about cars? I didn't get your question.
So we're not talking about 200-mile-an-hour cars, but we are talking about very fast cars. Elon Musk came to CDOT a while back and has talked about drilling underneath US 36 from Boulder to Denver. And you would have a platform that took your car down and then zipped it very fast into Denver. The only time you'd be able to use something that rapid, that fast, is when you don't have any interference. And so there's been some policy discussion about who owns underneath US 36. CDOT believes they do. And so I think that's the kind of thing that's moving forward, but certainly not at 200 miles an hour. I can't recall what Elon Musk, what he had suggested to us, but fairly rapid so that you could get maybe downtown in 10 minutes from Boulder. So that's
not to St. Louis.
Well, I maybe, but he hasn't talked to us about that. Yeah.
Another question?
Okay, so I've heard all of you mention TOD development, taking advantage of TOD locations, and creating place and utilizing more density to kind of address some of the ongoing problems, as well as equity and what that means for you as well. But I haven't heard any of you guys mention affordability, and I'm curious to know, when I personally work for a nonprofit in Denver and I get calls every week from people saying, I just got a job, but I can't afford my bus transit fare until that first paycheck, what do I do? And I firsthand know that there aren't a whole lot of resources out there for that. So I'm just curious in terms of Hyperloop and lightning speed, where are we at with just making transit affordable for those who can't afford it at this point?
I think that was the third bullet point of why I was pushing. I think as a local official, it's one of the biggest challenges that we have is upward mobility and opportunity for so many people in our community is stifled because of the lack of mobility. I mean, actual mobility, not just economic upward mobility, but what you bring up is so important for us to make sure that we include in everything that we do moving forward. So what I look at, what you're saying is whatever is created, whether it's transit-oriented development, and the reason why that's so important is because the more density you put around shared amenities, whether it's a transit station or even just parks and other things, you take some of that burden of having to create those amenities for each house or each neighborhood, and you're creating greater shared amenities. And so, but upward mobility, mobility overall has to be accessible to everyone. And I think once you have to have that included in whatever ingredients and then whatever recipe you set up for any of these solutions that have been discussed today.
Hold on.
From the transit perspective, you know, RTD just completed a year-long. I can talk about it.
Yeah, we're fine.
You are?
Just talk, yeah.
All right.
So RTD just completed fairly recently a year-long examination of its fare structures, right? So the outcome of it, in my opinion, was not what it should have been. You got great deals for people that fit a low-income category, a student category, or work for a big employer that has access to transit and can get an eco-pass. For the typical rider, the workforce rider, full fares are, I think, at a tipping point in decision-making, where people will say, do I take the bus or train, or do I just get in my car? And now with gas prices plummeting, more and more often I think we're going to see people making that choice to just get in their car.
If they have a car.
If they have a car. So those are some of the equity things too, that we need to start changing mindset on the transit side. RTD's
How much of the fare box?
Wait.
How much is recovered in the fare box?
anywhere between 23 and 30%. The rest comes from federal grants, the RTD tax. That's where the funding comes from. But getting back to the equity thing, the RTD talks about this partnership with Uber. Isn't it great? Let's get on our smartphone and set up a ride. What if you don't have a smartphone? Not everybody does. So we need to think about options for, as Steve says, accessibility to mobility, and that's really important.
Just one of the things that we're proposing is we're going to have a for-profit corporation, a government corporation, and a not-profit corporation. And the non-profit corporation does exactly what you're talking about, raise money to give to those individuals that need it to pay for that transportation so they can get to work, they can go do whatever they want to do. And we will address that in our structure as we go forward.
Next question? Harlan, you were first.
You mentioned freight, you mentioned people, you didn't mention data. So a lot of the issues, I mean, to me, this is myopic marketing. In other words, if you look at the lack of accessibility to broadband throughout the state, and the last mile, and the information highway, and all the buzzwords that you guys use, it seems to me the issues are the same. So my question is, how much does information access inform your thinking when it comes to transportation and vice versa?
take a stab at that with CDOT. In all the partnerships that we've been doing, we've required them to put fiber in. We have about 500 and 600 miles of fiber along the bigger corridors, but our hope is to get the whole state with fiber and 5G eventually. We have a lot of non-solicited proposals that come through to us that want to partner with us on that kind of thing. You're right, we're way behind time on that, but we know it exists and we're working on it.
What we're working on a future transportation system is that once you own the right-of-way, you can allow for the transportation of fiber, oil, gas, whatever in that right-of-way. Currently, the policy of the current railroads is not to allow that, except for rare occasions. And so we're going to try to change that and allow that as a part of that. I didn't mention it, but that's part of what we're planning.
Hi, excuse me. My name is Duke Crawford. I had a question about mobility, placemaking, multimodal, the future, flying cars. There's a real thing that people are doing around the world. They are called aerial trams. They're putting them in Bolivia, Mexico City. They're super cheap. You can hop over barriers like rivers, railroads, highways, and there are multiple locations in Denver that could work. Is anybody thinking about applying aerial trams, gondolas?
No, but I'd love to learn more.
We can learn from the Swiss.
Yeah. I'd love the idea.
I have to say that we had a presenter on a Hyperloop project. I think, Tom, that was the one you did for us. And the guy was from Saudi Arabia, and there was no restrictions because the government owned the land, the government owned the policy, and the government told people what to do, and so there were no restrictions because the government didn't restrict themselves. And so that Hyperloop project was really going fast because there wasn't public stakeholder meetings and those kinds of things that sometimes get in the way of making drastic changes like that. I'm eager to hear what happens. I think CDOT would be a little, I think they'd be very slow to adopt something like that, even if it's a great idea, just because of bureaucracy.
Hey guys, thanks for coming tonight. My name's Cameron Short. So obviously we understand that connectivity is one of the big problems, but something I haven't heard too much about is funding. I'm curious what innovative models you guys are looking at to fund some of these large-scale projects. I don't think technology is the barrier. I think it's probably more around funding. Have you guys looked at things like blockchain and tokenizing, or doing some different things to fund some of these large-scale projects?
How was DIA paid for?
Don't know. Public-private partnership, maybe?
DIA was paid for by revenue bonds issued by the city and county of Denver. That's the reason when I mention what we're trying to do is put together a local government that can issue revenue bonds based upon the revenue that's coming in on your project. That's what I see as funding, maybe 65, 70%. You're going to have private funding that's willing to do some things for you. You're going to have nonprofits that can do some things for you. But the combination of a local government that can issue revenue bonds and the other sources, I think it's like when they did 36 and finally put that together, they had 10 or 15 sources of money. Ultimately, when you put these together, they're going to have more than one source. But the real key is to be able to do the revenue bonds that can get you that initial set of funding that will get you down the road.
So public-private partnerships are always a catchphrase for everyone. A public-private partnership needs a return on investment, and that's why some of these rail lines aren't done because they can look at the fare box recovery and they can't see the return. I was the chair of the Northwest Parkway when we did the concession lease with Brisa. That was a 99-year concession lease. The reason it was 99 years was so that you can do that or not. It doesn't make any difference to me whether you like that or not. It's a private highway. You don't have to use it. You're not forced to use it. But it was a 99-year project, lease project, because of the return on investment that they had to have. So in CDOT, we look very carefully at how we can monetize anything. We didn't get the okay on 110, which would have given us $7 billion that we could have bonded against, and we could have done a lot of projects. But what we do look at, and tolls are one of these, if you run a toll lane down a corridor, the money that comes back can be used to build the next thing. People don't like toll roads, they don't have to use them, they can use general purpose lanes. That's one way CDOT tries to monetize things. Another way CDOT tries to monetize things is, for example, the mobility hub. If instead of CDOT getting that right-of-way, there's a private ownership of the right-of-way, then that right-of-way apron can be used to monetize something. You can't do that if it belongs to CDOT or if it's federal highway. You cannot monetize those kinds of things. So there's huge challenges in trying to figure out where do we get more money. Any more money that we get comes from somewhere. Usually it comes from you.
We're going to wrap up, but if you have questions, people will hang around, so we have an opportunity to ask later. I just want everyone on the panel in one sentence or less to share what they would like the audience to leave with tonight, and then we'll let Tom take over.
None of this can be done alone, and partnerships are key, whether we're talking public-private partnerships, private partnerships, and public partnerships, and that means working with all of our folks involved. But that doesn't mean it needs to also be limited to just listening to people on a panel talk. I want to hear about some of these other ideas that you have that I heard today from the audience were just as intriguing to me as the stuff that I heard from the people on the panel. So we're all in this together, and I look forward to working with you on these things, and thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, that's all right. I could have been last. Did you hear that? She said age before me. Ever since I turned 81, I've been falling apart, so I hesitate to take credit for it. The future is a great thing for all of us, and we have to have that vision. I want to thank Tom for starting the DaVinci Institute to talk about the future, because right now is the future. And it's what we do from here on that will make the difference. And we, all of us, need to be working together to make that possible. And so I'm, for one, having had 18 years as an elected official, understand the differences of policies between the 4 different levels of government that are represented on this panel. You got to have those people cooperating to make everything work. And you got to have the private end, you got to have the public end, you got to have the nonprofit end. And so there's a lot of things that has to take place to make it work. But we're on our way with the vision that you heard this evening to make understanding that when we get to 18 million people, we'll still be able to move north, south, and east, west.
We had talked about focusing on 2020 to 2030. I honestly think we should be focusing on 2050, and we should be looking at other countries that have to move far more people than we have and far vaster land than we have to learn from their best practices. And I think the best form of flattery is to borrow an idea. Of course, ask for permission, but it's that sort of collaborative approach that Colorado does really well, and I think we can learn from other projects through across the nation, but also certainly other countries as well. And I'd encourage us to have an open mind and think 2050?
Thanks. From my perspective as an RTD director, and I also want to recognize we've got another RTD director in the back there, Shelley Cook from District L. Is it Shelley? Yes? Yes. And that's principally Arvada, G-Line, some of Westminster.
Unincorporated Adams.
Unincorporated Adams, yeah. So in the north of I-70, 4 of the 5 directors are newly elected. And I think we're changing some thinking at RTD, and we're getting some movement slowly but surely, even in 6 weeks. So I think we're trying to make a difference. We want to be your partners, not your enemies in transit. And the reason people are frustrated, especially up here, about the way things are going with transit is because they want it. Not because they don't want it, they really want it. And that's a good thing. So it's a great place to start. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll ask the question that maybe some of you are asking, that is, why does CDOT want to invest in these futuristic kinds of technology? What's in it for CDOT? And I want to tell you that CDOT has recorded over 600 deaths annually from traffic problems, from things along I-70 internally. Any CDOT area that's covered, any road that CDOT covers. 600 deaths annually is a whole lot. It's going up every year. Part of that is because we have a lot of population. But we do believe that investment in fiber and technology will really make travel safer. And if we can make travel safer by doing autonomous platooning vehicles, if we can get money into V2B and V2X where cars can talk to each other, where they can talk to their surroundings and be safer. That's really why CDOT is investing this money. It's not just because it's a great idea, it's because we hope it'll save lives.
All right, I'd like to hear a big round of applause for our panel. And I'd like to hear a nice round of applause for Michael Cushman. He did a great job. There are always, in groups like this, some very unique people in the room, regardless of their hats. And there's some of you who are transportation experts, I know that. One of the reasons this panel came together was because Tom and Mikkel made this facility available. They liked the topic. Why was I so motivated to do this? Because I've spent 40 years as a consultant to the one industry that is not represented up here. Now, don't ask me why they're not here. It's called Blue Water, okay? So my clients for a long time were Hapag-Lloyd, Hamburg Süd, NYK Lines, and Maersk Line. They're the elephant that is not in the room. Why? For some reason, we don't have large enough rivers. We don't have a port. Actually, one of the things that got me all excited about talking with Karen was the fact that she started talking about ports, okay? And the importance of those ports being near each other, working with each other, etc. I do have some history in rail. My great uncle was the timekeeper for the Ottoman Railroad. We were Greeks from Turkey, and that was a big contract. And I regret the day that I was rooting for Lawrence of Arabia to blow all my uncle's jobs up. But also I had another group that I worked for in this country called Conrail, if you'll remember that group some time ago. I walked out of the room shaking my head, and my assistant asked me, what's the problem? I said, these guys aren't going to be around for long. And yes, in trucking as well. So transportation runs in my blood. That's why I love this type of topic. But I'm wondering how many of you realize what's in front of you right now? Not me, the people on that platform. Look who they represent. They represent RTD, they represent CDOT, they represent the World Trade Center, they represent Spaceport. And of course with Bob, we've got a new initiative. Actually, it's an old initiative that we keep dusting off and putting back on the platform in modern rail. For those of you who sat back and said, geez, this wasn't exciting, you were not listening. You just were not listening. But there's some things that were not said that are critical. Karen and I talked about the fact that Bob and I had an interesting experience in this state, where the #1 person to bring jobs in the States told us he didn't want modern oil, because you know why? It was going to bring more people to Colorado. That's unbelievable. What Bob didn't have the chance to talk about tonight is the fact that if we get the right rail system in here, we're going to take the most hazardous cargo we have. It's called NBC. Who knows what NBC is? Yes, sir.
Nuclear, biological, and chemical.
Nuclear, biological, chemical. Do you know where it goes right now on the rail systems here? Does anybody know where it passes?
Downtown.
Where does it pass, sir?
Right through Denver, huh?
Right through Denver and our most densely populated areas, okay? CDOT is really invested in to getting some modern solutions here. I know that. I could go on. Steve's group. Right now, the spaceport in the near-term future is about horizontal takeoff. Am I correct?
That's correct. Because of the proximity to Denver International Airport, the spacecraft that we were approved is horizontal takeoff, not vertical. So if you understand, DIA has airspace coming out of it, you know, like an upside down wedding cake.
Yep.
Because of the proximity of the Colorado Air Spaceport to DIA, we'd have to fly underneath DIA's airspace to avoid disruption. And so that's why the vehicle in our spaceport that was approved is a dual vehicle where it's going to be a horizontal takeoff, and it's going to have jet fuel and rocket fuel would be the type of vehicle that can launch out of there. You will not see rockets going straight up because it would interfere with the DIA airspace. So there was a lot of things that couldn't be said tonight because of our time constraints. I would rather have had the panel here for 3 hours. And I've still had the same complaint, Michael. So my end of the program is over, except to say one thing. We all failed the test. You know what the test was earlier? I said, and there it is. I said, what's next month's program here at?
Brain.
What is it?
The brain, you said.
I said, that's the other month. This
Yeah, but
month
you
coming
went
up.
back and forth.
Yeah, I did. It's the rise of the female entrepreneur. And for those of you who think that's not significant, think again, you should be here. Tom, could I ask you to come up and make some comments? And thank you all to you for coming.
All right, I want to thank all the panelists here. This is terrific. As you can see, this is a very complicated topic, and we've barely scratched the surface of any of it. I think over the next couple decades here, we're going to see more changes in transportation than we've seen since the rail lines connected 150 years ago. The changes are happening, they're escalating, and they're compounding, and things are happening very quick. And so it's going to get real exciting very fast here. If any of you have ideas for new topics for us to discuss, let us know. We're all ears. We'd love to hear what other future-related topics you want to hear about. We've got some amazing potential panelists out there in the Denver area. This is a very bright area, and so love to hear what's going through your heads. And any of you that may be interested in being part of a co-working entrepreneurial community, talk to either myself or Mikhail. We have a few offices left up here. We have the entire top floor here. We have 37 startups in our space right now. Any of you that would like to join that, and with some amazing view of the mountains, you can see all of the snowstorms coming in here. It's actually very exciting. Get in touch with us. And thank you all for coming, and have a great rest of the evening. Thank you.